Good morning. It really is special. I'm so excited to have you all here. And the fact that you get together with your families is special too. Let's go through a quick review and then jump through, I think, what is notable about Easter, but often gets overlooked as a singular central component. And so if you're here this morning, hopefully that'll speak to your heart for your family to be a blessing. Well, first of all, we have journeyed through the temple to this point. Now, if you're not familiar with the temple, I know this is going to be a crash course. And when you leave, there's the tabernacle and the temple next to each other as little displays. The reason it's important is that Jesus is fulfilling what was throughout the whole Old Testament, this attempt to come close, come near to God. And we are going to enter the holiest place today. But let's do a quick review. First of all, we were cast off the mountain. And Ezekiel talks about the Eden, which is the Garden of Eden, which we say the Garden of Eden, but actually Eden is larger than the garden. But this space in which Adam and Eve dwelt, you can see, of course, its beauty, the sunrise. And then they sin and they fall short of the glory of God. They are cast off the mountain out of Eden. And believe it or not, it says cherubim and a flaming sword are there to keep them out. That's going to be important in a little bit. But then Abraham was given the covenant, and Abraham goes back up the mountain, Mount Moriah. In fact, Abraham attempted to sacrifice Isaac in the same space that Jerusalem sits, very close to where the temple resided. So Abraham goes back up the mountain, but even then, it's not enough that he would be willing to sacrifice his own son. So God spares Isaac, and they find a ram in the thicket. So this is the covenant given to Abraham that God would not forget his people. Well, then later, Moses goes on a mountain. And on the mountain, he receives the 10 commandments or the commandments of God. So now we have the people going to the mountain to receive the covenant and going to the mountain to receive the commandments. But even then, they couldn't fulfill the will of God and have a right relationship with God. So King David, he decided to take that tabernacle and build it into a temple. He said, God should not live in a tent. And so when he built the temple, he built walls around it, and it became the city of Jerusalem. And I shared with you not too long ago that we have the walls of separation called sin. And even as we try to get back to God, it feels like there are certain people who are allowed in and certain people who are kept out. In order to get in Jerusalem, of course, you had to navigate to one of those gates. You had to be allowed to get in. When you got into the city and you wanted to get into the temple, there were the mikvah baths. Most of us today think of this like baptism. That is the precursor to baptism, where they would go and be ceremonially made pure. The rainwater would fill up that northern pool, and then you would be walking into the southern pool. The water would wash over you. You'd be purified. You could go into the temple. But if you went into the temple, you still weren't allowed to go into the holy place to be present with God. You went into the temple, they had a court of Gentiles, a court of women, a court of Israelites, and a court of priests. Every layer was sort of a limiting factor to somebody not being allowed to get any closer. Some of you might see this, and if you didn't realize, a few weeks ago I shared, this is similar to our own courtrooms. There's a place in which there's a banister, and you might go and you might observe court of Gentiles. You might be able to go inside those railings, but then you realize the closer you get to the judge, the closer you get to judgment. And that was no different than the temple. The closer you went into the temple, the closer you came to God. The closer you came to God, the closer you came to judgment. It's important for us to have that willingness to say, the closer I get to God, the ready I am for judgment. So because of his judgment, the readiness I have to receive mercy. Well, inside the court of priests was an altar. And the altar was where you shared a sacrifice. And by sharing that sacrifice, you were allowed, on the priest's behalf, you were allowed to go into the holy place and be closer to God because he forgave you or your people or your family of sin. And if you went into the holy place, you would go into the holy place and you'd have these three things that you would see. You'd see a menorah, you'd see the showbread, and you'd see the altar of incense. And of course, if this doesn't resonate yet, why Jesus fulfills everything that the temple had presented, It is that he is the light of the world, the menorah. This is a room inside the temple that has no windows. So the only light is from the menorah. And John 1 tells us he is the light of the world. And then, of course, the bread. Jesus says in John 6, I am the bread of life. Take, eat of me, that you may have life too. And then the altar of incense, if you see it, is sitting up against that curtain. And that curtain, yeah, you can go to that, Mike. Let's go ahead and just show them how that plays out. So the holy space is then right in front. That curtain that we just saw is going into the Holy of Holies. And I'm going to get to that in a few minutes. But in the Holy of Holies would be the Ark of the Covenant. And then, of course, there'd be cherubim over the Ark of the Covenant. Now, you remember, when they were kicked out of the Garden of Eden, the cherubim were set in front of it to keep them out from eating the tree of life, but also being consumed by their sin. So here we have sort of the garden reenacted, God's presence among his people if they came in to the Holy of Holies. But we'll talk about how that's possible in a minute. So let's go ahead. Mike, give me that. This would be the Holy of Holies. If you got past the curtain, you could be in this presence. I'm going to share with you in a little bit how that room became empty. But go ahead and give me the last one, Mike. We'll land on this for the rest of the sermon. We started out with the priest facing the curtain, and now we end with the sermon of Jesus reaching through the curtain. Can I ask you a simple question? What is something that is bad when it's missing, when it's empty? Just shout it out. What do you feel like is wrong with the world when something you find missing? The candy jar. The gas tank. Yes, I can say from experience, there is somebody in my family, not naming names, but I'm not sure she knows the car has a gas tank. It's on E. The gas tank goes empty. What else? I was waiting for that one, Aaron. When the bank account is empty. That is not fun. My belly. I am starving. What? Oh, the cookie jar? Yes. The cookie jar. That is not good. Anybody have this problem? You go in and the milk just has just a little bit. And it's not enough, people. Just use the rest of it and throw it away. But you don't, because you don't want to throw it away. You figure you can just put it back in the fridge. That's the next person's job. It's not enough for cereal bowl. It's not enough for cookies and milk. But you decided to leave it because you didn't have the decency to just throw it away. I know that feeling too. Do we have another one? What over here? Toilet paper. Toilet paper might be the worst, and I'm going to really emphasize toilet paper in a public restroom is probably the worst. And if you're the person who reaches under to your neighbor and says, hey, then that's really bad. That's desperate. Not that I should overshare, but I will share. I did not reach under and ask for more toilet paper, but I did get caught going from one stall to the other. And boy, it was like a deer in headlights. I didn't think anybody else was in the restroom, and when I opened that stall and I stared deep into the eyes of that old man, I don't think he said it, but it was I hear you, man, been there. Just move along, move along. I have news for you this morning. We have entered into the temple, and we've gone past the altar of mercy, and we've introduced the holy place, and now we see this large curtain. Now, just so you know, the curtain in front of the Holy of Holies. The Holy of Holies is the place where God resides, sits among God's people. The whole time with the tabernacle, it was a cloud that went over the holy place, as the fire of God was present in among the people, and it was central to the people. But then the temple was destroyed in 586 BC, and the Ark of the Covenant was removed from the Holy of Holies. Now, most people would look at that and say, well, the Babylonians destroyed the Jewish people and their God. But Ezekiel 10 tells us that God left the temple before it was destroyed, as if to say, you've been so unfaithful, I'm just leaving. And left the temple, and the Babylonians come, and without it being protected by God and the people being unfaithful, they destroyed it. Well, here's why that's important. When they rebuilt the temple, the holy space and the Holy of Holies no longer had the Ark of the Covenant. In fact, Jewish tradition said we have to have something in this holy. Now imagine the room. I shared with you that the temple is probably the size of UJ's to Casey's to South Street. It's that big of the space with the Gentile court into the holy space. The Holy of Holies was protected by a curtain that's probably 60 feet tall. It was 60 feet tall. This is about 22 feet at its peak. So 3 times the height of this roof. And then, of course, 30 feet wide. That was the curtain that held off the space of the Holy of Holies. And when the priests went in there, they only went in once a year. That space was only participated in on Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement. And the Jewish people on that day would sacrifice a goat, and then the priest would take whoever was selected. We read this in Luke chapter 1. It was Zechariah when he was going to be told that he was going to have a son and name him John. That was Zechariah going into the temple, into the Holy of Holies. But the priest would have gone in, and in that time, they would not have the Ark of the Covenant. It would be empty. And there was a hollowness to the people to know that the Ark of the Covenant had been removed. They put a foundation stone there, and they would go in, and they would sprinkle the blood of the goat on the foundation stone and on the floor of this vast space where God was supposed to be present. And yet you still felt like something was missing. You ever notice something that's localized? The power of something localized when it's not there. Have you ever done that where you put a TV up and you've got an outlet and you plug it in and the outlet doesn't work and you're like, dang it, I should have put the TV on another wall, but this is the outlet. This is where the power is supposed to come from. You go to the hospital. We've always joked about our kids. There's always an outlet next to the bed that your loved one is laying in. It's like the only outlet in the room. I've kind of joked that if I was on life support, I'm afraid my kids would unplug me just to power up their phone, you know? I'm on 1%. I'm like, I'm on 1%. Sorry, I shouldn't break sermon here. And yet, you know the power source. Well, the temple was that if you got to the Holy of Holies, the power of God, the presence of God would be in that space. But it was so localized that you can also see what became problematic. They left the temple and then did as they pleased. And God would frown upon the way they behaved because they didn't behave in the manner he intended for them through the covenant and through the commandments. That is why it's so important for us to see the evidence in the power of something empty. By the time of Jesus, the temple still is constructed. There's this beautiful 60-foot curtain, and yet the foundation stone, not the Ark of the Covenant, is on the other side. Can you imagine Jesus going to the temple, knowing he is divine, knowing he's the answer, and yet he's only allowed to go into the court of Israelites? And he sees the altar and he sees the sacrifices. He knows on the other side of that door is the holy place. He knows he's been telling them, I am the Messiah. He's been saying it in so many words. I'm the bread of life. I'm the light of the world. He even says in John 14, you ask of me the incense, the prayers of the people, and I will give it to you. He's telling them who he is. And yet even he was not allowed to go in to the holy place. He himself is the divine who could consume the Holy of Holies, and yet he was kept out. Not only was he kept out, he was arrested. For saying that he was a Messiah, he was arrested for being a heretic. That Friday morning, he was beaten. That Friday afternoon at 3 p.m., he breathed his last, crucified. Jesus, the divine, had been taken from the temple, removed from the city. It's kind of interesting. On Yom Kippur, they sacrificed 2 goats. The priest would take the blood of one goat, and sprinkle it on the foundation stone, or what would have been the Ark of the Covenant, in the Holy of Holies for the forgiveness of God. And then the other goat, they'd lay hands on and place all the sins of the people, and that was called the scapegoat, and they'd send it out of the city. And here you have Jesus being sent out of the city to be crucified, both absorbing the sins of humanity and being the scapegoat for our failures. Before it was dark and became Passover, they took the body down. They put Jesus in a tomb, and they rolled a stone in front of it. We're here this morning because they went to that tomb. I told them at sunrise service, the stone was not rolled away by Jesus. The stone was rolled away by the angel. Jesus didn't need to move the stone to get out, but we needed the stone to be moved so we could look in, that we could see it was empty. You might be upset when you find out that your gas tank is empty. You might be upset because your refrigerator is empty. You might be upset because your checking account is empty. But did you know that when you came this morning, you should be incredibly excited, overwhelmed, and blessed that the Holy of Holies is actually empty? And the reason for that is because now the tomb is empty, because God is not confined to the grave. We don't celebrate things that are empty, but when we do, we know why they're important. You ever looked into a bird's nest and you saw the open egg and you don't find a baby bird? You know what happened. You ever see in a tree a little chrysalis, the cocoon, and it's open? And you know that that signifies the caterpillar became a beautiful butterfly. I was hoping to see the empty stands after last night's game and be able to go, Illinois rushed the court. We emptied the stands, but we didn't. But we were there. That's better than Purdue can say. Sorry, that's a little shot at my family from Indiana. Yes, you know, if you see the empty stands, you were there to see a great game, to be a part of something special. It happened. The empty tomb is not God's absence, it's God's evidence. The most sacred room in our Christianity is the empty tomb. And when Jesus died, it says that the curtain tore in two. Now imagine this for a minute. This curtain that is 60 feet tall and 30 feet wide is called a hand's breadth, a hand's width thick. Tradition holds 300 priests would have to work with it to take it down. It weighed some thousands of pounds just to clean it and then put it back up. It's massive. When Jesus died, it said that it tore the temple curtain in two. And we've always used it as Christians to be symbolic of the fact that this is the opening to God. Notice Jesus' hand reaching through that curtain right there, as if to say, yes, it is finished. Hebrews says it best. The Hebrew author says, Jesus opened a new and life-giving way through the curtain into the most holy place. But I would challenge the Hebrew author to point out, when we think that God is localized, we've overlooked how powerful the empty tomb is. When Matt read the resurrection story, he talked about how Jesus would go before them. Mary was to go meet the disciples. That Jesus coming out of the tomb means he is on the move. And I would offer this morning. So many of us think of Jesus only in the historical context 2,000 years ago. And if you do, then when you run into problems in life, you're only looking in the rearview mirror to ask God what he can and did do. But if you believe in the empty tomb, you see Jesus is going before us. He is on the move. He's ahead of you. He is where he is waiting for you to catch up that you might be. He said this about the church. He said, we're not going to be localized. It's not going to be the Holy of Holies. Psalm 24:1, the earth is the Lord's and all that is in it. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. The resurrection is a story about God moving through his people. Acts 1:8, that you will be my witnesses. The Spirit will come upon you. And you will go out. The body of Christ will be present in the world. We say we are growing the kingdom of God through the lives of everyday people. Jesus said that in the prayer. Your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. How does that happen? When Jesus is localized, it doesn't happen. But when Jesus is moving through his people, it changes lives. It changes the world. So if you're here this morning and you want the God of the universe to live in your life, you have to be emptied first too. Believe it or not, the empty tomb is still symbolic of one more space that needs to be empty. God will not try to unpack his divine life into a crowded living space. He can't come in and force his way in. Revelations 3, I stand at the door and knock. If you come to me and say, I got a lot of stuff going on in here, I'm not sure I can let you in yet. How many of you have done that with the in-laws? I'm not sure we're ready for you yet. But if you empty your heart, you prepare yourself for him, he is ready to take you into a special way of life. Stop making excuses. We have kids, but I have to work. But what about those other people that go to church that I don't like? What about that church? The way they do things. Does it sound familiar? This is also what Jesus said. Go and invite them to the kingdom. But some said, I just bought a field. I just purchased oxen. I just got married. If you're making excuses for why you can't empty your heart and prepare yourself for Jesus, then understand that that's what you will take with you to the grave. The empty grave is to empty you and me, that we might be filled with a God that's on the move. And who knows that you have been put on this earth for such a time and a position as this. This morning, that torn curtain leads us to an empty tomb that is the evidence of a living God who is on the move. Are you ready to let him move in your life?